Hello, Felix. I have your story for this time. I may or may not have some helpers, but I'm going to tell you the story. This is a story about a guy who lived at the top of a mountain. Nobody really knows how he ended up living at the top of the mountain, but he was just up there. He lived up there by himself. He had a little hut that he lived in. Wasn't very big, but it didn't need to be. And he liked it up there. It wasn't very pretty at the top of the mountain because not much grew up there, but he had a lovely view of everything. And sometimes he could see the clouds from above and sometimes from below, and sometimes he was right in the middle of them. So that was pretty cool. He stayed up there year round, and sometimes the year it got very snowy and cold, but he did this thing where he dug kind of into the ground in the hut, and that helped keep him warm. He did burn fires a little bit because his source of food was a garden. He actually built another hut where everything was surrounded, and inside there he was able to grow plants that provided him with lots of his food because there wasn't much wildlife or animals to hunt up there on the top of the mountain anyway. And he would collect water in a big place that he'd hollowed out so that when it rained up there, he could save the water and use that for cooking and drinking. And in the winter, he had some big heavy furs that he had brought up there to him that he stayed wrapped in. And in the summer, he mostly ran around naked because it was by himself up there and there wasn't anybody to be upset if they saw him being all naked. And he lived like this for a long time. The one luxury that he sort of kept up there for himself at the top of the mountain was paper and pencils. And he did get some supplies. About once a year, someone would come climbing up the mountain. And the word had gotten out in the world that if you wanted to go visit this man at the top of the mountain, you needed to bring pencil and paper. That was the only thing that he wanted. He had his own food and he had his own clothes as much as he needed, and he had a place to live and he had water to drink, but he wanted paper and pencil. So when people would come up, they would bring paper and pencil with him, and he would sit up there and he wrote books. And he'd written books for many years, and he wrote and he read. And the way it worked was like this. He would in the morning read a book, but it was a book that he had written about 25 years ago, so he'd forgotten everything he'd put in it, and he didn't remember how it went, so he could still be surprised by it. And he would get it out and he would read it, and then in the afternoon he would write on to the next book, and add to that book, and it would be there waiting for him 25 years later when he finally got around to reading it. The other thing he liked to do with his pencil and paper is he wrote stories for the people below. He would take a piece of paper and he would write a story on both sides of it. It had to be a relatively short story, although he had very tiny, very precise handwriting. And he would write the story on the front and the back of the paper, and then he would fold it up into a paper airplane. And because he was so high up there on the top of the mountain and the winds were just perfect for it, he would throw the paper airplane and it would float for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles out from the edge of the mountain and finally land in the village down below. And the first few times it happens, they found a paper airplane and they'd play with the airplane until someone noticed there was writing on it and unfolded it and read the story. But these stories eventually became very famous, and people would come and vacation in the valleys around the mountain just waiting and hoping that it would be a day that one of the stories from the top of the mountain came down. And in this way, without ever leaving the mountain, the man became kind of a famous storyteller, and eventually people wanted to go up there and talk to him about his stories, but he didn't want to talk about them. He just wanted to read them. And that's the story of the man who used to sit at the top of the mountain and throw stories down to all the people below. I will see you again next time.